Before we begin today's true camping stories of horror, I wanted to say that I appreciate all of your support on this channel as it's grown very quickly, and both Jill and I have created an email address where you are able to submit your own scary stories for narration on this channel if you want to, if you're interested in doing that. That email address is on the screen now, which is thetruekingofcreepy@gmail.com. If you would like any of your scary stories to be used in a video, it always helps me to label what kind of story it is, and also to have an appropriate name that I can actually credit. Thank you very much for your support. That's there if you're interested. Let's hop right into the video. My fiance and I were on a camping trip last summer in Arkansas, casually grilling some dinner when we heard someone loudly yelling for help. I ran a few campsites over to find a clearly drunk man standing in a pool of his own blood. Apparently he had dropped his knife and nicked an artery in his ankle, which was spurting blood like a fountain. My fiance was not far behind me and helped get it wrapped and elevated when I ran back for my phone to call an ambulance, only to find out that we had no cell service. I knew there was a hospital roughly 20 miles away, so I made a judgment call and loaded the man up into his truck and we took off. Now is a good time to mention that blood, it makes me super squeamish, and I think pure adrenaline is the only thing that kept me from passing out at the wheel. I made it to the hospital in 12 minutes just as he started slurring his speech and hinting at losing consciousness, and I still remember the pool of blood spilling out of the door off the floor mat as they took him inside. My fiance picked me up from the hospital and we headed back. We ended up having to watch his dog, and we tried our best to have a normal evening. The man actually showed back up around 10:30 p.m. with 18 stitches. The doctor had told him if we hadn't been there, or if we had maybe waited for an ambulance, he would have bled out and died. It's a horrifying situation, but we saved a man's life. My family used to go camping with a few groups of friends when I was a kid. I remember one Christmas when I was about 5, we were camping out in the bush. There were 9 kids in total at our campsite. We were allowed to wander through the bush. The parents would give us a walkie-talkie to tell us when to come back to camp, and we never really wandered far. Anyway, out of nowhere, an unfamiliar voice came over our walkie-talkie, and it was a man's voice.
"Hey kids, it's Santa. I have some presents for you, and I'm in the woods that you're in. I need you to come and look for me. You do want your presents this year, don't you? It's Christmas time after all."
We all ran back to our campsite, all excited that Santa had actually talked to us. The walkie-talkie was taken off us and we weren't allowed to go anywhere for the rest of the trip. We were pretty devastated at the time, but I understand the seriousness and creepiness of it now looking back as an adult. Of the countless hours I've spent in the woods, this is the one time, the only few seconds that I cannot explain. I distance hike when I can. Sometimes this means getting up early or even staying out late to get as many miles as possible. Sometimes walking in the pitch dark with a low light headlamp gets a little spooky. I grew up in the woods of this area and I've slept under our canopy of stars more nights than I can possibly count. I've trekked thousands of miles of trail, riverbank, lakeshore, ridge, bottoms, bogs, and creeks. I've hunted the game. I'm establishing this because it's important you understand I've heard, seen, and smelled about all that this region has to offer in the way of its wilderness. My scariest experience, though, happened at about 4:30 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light wouldn't be visible in the treetops for another 30 to 40 minutes. Another hour past that until sunrise, and I was on mile 5. I'm in a low bottom that's wedged between 2 steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by thick underbrush, young maple, and an old oak growth. I'm focused on the small light from my headlamp, just one step after the other, and I'm zoning out. Then, I heard a loud crack, and I froze solid. This is the part I have trouble describing. It's 4:30 in springtime, and that means I'm the only thing making noise. There's no birds chirping, nothing. It's dead quiet. Mid-step, I froze. When fight or flight kicks in, you have these immediate instinct thoughts, and the thought that was instantly flashing in my mind as I stood there balancing myself into silence was, if I hear that again, I'm turning around and I'm going back the way I came in a hurry. Why? Because that sound was not a branch breaking, it wasn't deadfall, it wasn't a widowmaker. I was damn sure I had just heard something intentional. Hearing it twice, well, that meant get out of here. To describe it as best as I can, it sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a small tree. More a fungo bat-sized stick than a baseball bat, and the distinction in my head being that sound was a crack, and it was not a thud or really a thump. I have described it as explosive in the past because it was just so sudden and terribly loud. I had the sense that it was about 50 yards directly in front of me, and it was loud and extremely clear. Now, as I stood there, completely spooked, I realized the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where that sound came from, and I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was going to come to a 180-degree turn and start up the ridge going away from the creek. Now this meant as soon as I got the courage to move towards this noise, I was going to have to turn my back to it and get up that ridge. This actually made me very nervous. My head's somewhere between this must be a meth fiend murderer and Bigfoot bludgeoning. Minutes pass, and I just breathe my foggy breath into my glasses and listen. Nothing. Dead quiet. I've got about 20 to 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlamp and start to slowly creep to the 180-degree turn. Now, when you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every tree branch in front of you casts a big black moving shadow on the trail. That did not help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend, and I'm moving pretty fast at this point, trying desperately to be quiet, taking tiny, shallow breaths so I can listen while huffing it up the trail. And then I smell it. A stench hits me that I just can't describe. I just imagined wet, rotten death. I've actually worked scenes where humans have expired in a past life as a firefighter, and this was like days old decomposition, but it smelled strange. I kept walking, fast. By the time I made it to the top of that ridge, I was huffing, and the first light was showing. But I didn't stop moving until full light was out and the birds were chirping. I've heard it all in these woods, and I've smelled it all, I'm telling you. But I don't know what the hell that was. Deadfall, and especially leafed-out branches, they make a lot of noise on the way down. I've heard it many times, but I just don't know.